Good afternoon, Christoph.
Hello, Will. How are you doing?
Not bad at all, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm good, thank you.
Good, good. Well, thanks very much for joining me today.
Yeah, sure.
And for anyone that doesn't know, this is an interview with Christoph Schultz, who is one of the design leads at Otto in Germany. And my name's Will Sutton. So for anyone that hasn't listened before, I'm the DevOps team lead for Energize Cloud. We're a recruitment business based in Manchester, and we recruit across digital, SAP, and cloud technologies for clients in Germany. So again, thanks for joining me today, Christoph. If you could just tell me a little bit about yourself and your current role for everyone listening, please.
Yeah, sure. So people usually just call me Chris because everything else is just complex and hard to pronounce, etc. I'm the technical design lead of Team Plankton at the Deep Sea project at Otto, which is all about establishing the Otto marketplace for other sellers to sell goods on our website. I've been at Otto and joined the company in December 2020. As a software developer, became the technical design lead of my team in March 2022, when the other design lead, our former lead, left for another Otto Group company to pursue other challenges. Yeah, that's basically my current role. I'm responsible for the technical architecture and technical design of whatever we implement. And I'm responsible for communicating with other teams and kind of negotiating APIs, etc., and getting everything ready for our developers to start coding.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. And I guess for those that maybe haven't interacted with Otto before, what is it that, for everyone listening, that Otto does?
It's one of the internet sellers, basically. So we sell goods through the internet. It's basically German Amazon kind of a thing. We're one of the oldest companies. We have a long history and got into the internet business quite soon, and are now trying to establish the marketplace business to kind of expand what we're doing.
Yeah, great. And I actually, at the AWS Summit a few weeks ago, I listened to one of the talks by one of the Otto leaders, and I think he was explaining that Otto partners with over 3,000 retailers, I think it is now.
It's even more by now, yeah.
Yep. So massive organization. So just to kind of also give people an understanding, what's your background from a work experience, and how have you kind of ended up in the design lead position that you're in now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've spent most of my professional time at the university. So I started studying computer science in 2004 after spending too much of my youth programming. And I kind of got into the whole PhD thing in 2011 after getting my what's basically a master's degree. Did lots of teaching, lots of software development, lots of mentoring, actually, and then didn't care for staying at the university in the research business. And then decided to get into the industry. And that's how I ended up at Otto. So Otto is basically my first industry workplace. And thus I ended up starting here as a developer, and then transitioned into the whole technical design lead role, where I'm doing lots of mentoring as well, and all these things that I already did at the university, but at a less professional level, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. That's really interesting. So, I guess for people listening, then, it necessarily, you don't have to have been a developer for 15, 20 years to end up in the role that you're in then.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about basic skills. I think it's all about communication. It's all about kind of getting along with people, having a grasp of technology, having a grasp of the underlying concepts, even, which is much more important than actually having hands-on experience with certain technologies. It's much more important to be able to learn new technologies quickly, and having that mindset of wanting to do that and understanding all of the basic concepts enough to be able to do that. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I've been recruiting in tech for about 8 years, but specifically in DevOps for just over 4. And you know, the fact that you've said that learning new technologies is even more important. I couldn't agree. You know, the job descriptions that I get now versus 6 months ago have, you know, a whole host of new technology on there. So I think an ability to learn is hugely important. So one of the reasons why obviously I was really keen to get you on today, apart from your experience, was obviously you actually engage with DevOps engineers and have and possibly still even are looking to grow and hire DevOps engineers now and in the future. I think for anyone that's kind of a current DevOps engineer and might be looking for a new career change in terms of their employer, what would you say makes a DevOps engineer stand out?
Yeah, so I can only speak from my team's perspective here, right? Because in general, the Deep Sea project, we don't have that many DevOps engineers, and we have very specific reasons for looking for a DevOps engineer. In my experience so far, what has made certain candidates stand out, apart from like knowing their basic stuff, of course, like knowing networking, knowing server administration, like the basics, it's kind of all about not necessarily knowing like hundreds of technologies. I've seen CVs where people were an expert in basically everything, which I find hard to believe. So I'm kind of more interested in getting someone who knows a few technologies very well and who knows or demonstrates that they know the concepts very well. That's one thing. And the other thing is, as already mentioned, right? So being able to communicate those technologies, because kind of ideally, I'm looking for someone who can explain what they do to their parents, because that kind of gives me an idea that they are able to sympathize, empathize with other people, and kind of put themselves in other people's positions. And explain it to them in words they can understand. And that means that they can also write documentation for other people, as opposed to just being in their own kind of little bubble, but also imagining what it's like for other people to read documentation, and that they are able to communicate with product owners and business designers and management, which is to me hugely important. So it's kind of know your tech, know the basics, know the foundations, but also be able to communicate with other people.
Okay, thank you for that. And that's really interesting for me to hear as well, obviously as a tech recruiter. I think what can often happen is, particularly when you get job descriptions and, you know, you're not a hands-on expert like yourself, it can be quite easy to get absorbed by the list of technologies, and then maybe
can be rather impressive, can't it?
Yeah, and maybe just focus on the years of experience that they've got with each area, you know, whether it be Kubernetes or whether it be, you know, Terraform, for example. So you're saying that, you know, you find it just as important then for them to be able to communicate and articulate that with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started out in computer science, one of the reasons that this seemed kind of like an appropriate choice was that back then I was not as able to communicate with other people. But had I known that the job description is basically 80% communication, even more so that I'm now in the technical design lead position, I need to communicate with other teams regularly. I'm not sure I would have taken this road, but it's actually it's more communication than people who start studying computer science actually think. Because they're usually very focused on technology, right? And on certain programming language, and Java is the best, and C++ is kind of not the best, and they have all these opinions, and they don't really matter, because in the end, it's all about kind of working with your team on whatever you need to deliver, and with whatever tools you need to deliver that well. So that's a whole different skill set than what people think.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think, you know, one thing that I've typically noticed as well from my first conversation with a prospective DevOps engineer is we do get very focused on their technical experience. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like when it actually comes to wanting to bring someone on board, it does end up being a lot more about those soft skills and actually how they are as an individual, and how they are as a a culture fit for your team.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. There's of course, like, you have to fulfill the baseline, right? So
Yeah.
if we are, for example, looking for someone who has experience in Kubernetes, then that's kind of a must. That's the baseline that they have to clear. But when it comes to the candidates who clear their particular baseline, the others wouldn't apply usually anyway. Then it's all about also the cultural fit, which especially at Otto we kind of put a big emphasis on, because I can't really. We have to work together all the time, right? Every day we have to see each other, so we'd better be comfortable and be willing to help each other out. So that becomes a huge thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think that's relatable in most lines of work. Not necessarily just tech. So thanks for sharing, obviously, about what you feel would help a DevOps engineer to stand out to you. And I'm getting from what you're saying that we have to have the baseline technologies, of course we do, but then it is a lot more about how they communicate, how they fit in, and communication is possibly more important, in my opinion, in the remote world, especially now, because we can't see what each other's doing, so we have to communicate a lot more, whether it's over Teams or on the phone or on email. It kind of brings me on to another question, and something that's quite important at the moment, because the DevOps market has extremely, I'd say it's grown a lot in the past 12 to 18 months in terms of the demand for DevOps engineers, also the amount of companies adopting a DevOps way of working. And something that I always speak to candidates about is what interests them most. And a DevOps engineer role in Otto is probably completely different to a DevOps engineer role somewhere else. And it's always important for us to match what the candidate's interests are, not just can they do the job. So obviously, you've been working in tech for quite a while, and more recently working with DevOps engineers, software engineers. But what would you say is the area within DevOps that interests you the most, and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. For example, the first question that candidates should always ask is kind of what is your interpretation of DevOps in the first place, right? Because as you said, it's complete from company to company, from individual to individual. It's a completely different interpretation. So yeah, what I'm personally interested in is automation is one of the big words. So we have kind of all this infrastructure in the cloud, right? And all the infrastructure is better infrastructure as code, so it's reproducible, easily maintainable, one place to look up what we're actually having in terms of infrastructure. And the big benefit is in disaster recovery scenarios, we can just move to another account, apply the same infrastructure as code configuration, and kind of build up our infrastructure in that account, transition to that one. But that requires full automation, right? Full automation is kind of the gold standard that, in my view, we should be kind of heading towards. And also serves a different purpose, because if you have everything fully automated, then the code needs to lie somewhere, right? And it's kind of half the documentation of the whole process is already in the code, which is a nice thing as well. People don't have to worry when we have a disaster recovery scenario. Emotions usually run high. And if all they have to do, instead of running through, like we have this long run book of steps that people have to run through, but it's in minute detail with a few comforting statements sprinkled in. But just pressing a button is a lot better. So automate everything. That's kind of what I'm most interested in. There's another area though. So one DevOps thing is also DevOps is a lot in my mind about monitoring, and there's all this metrics collection, all this dashboarding going on. So you have something to look at, a few beautiful graphs to look at, a few pie charts if you want to, but getting the statistics right behind those dashboards is actually quite hard. And that's another area that interests me personally, because that's kind of a more mathematical way of, like, more mathematics into the whole DevOps thing. But getting dashboarding right, understanding the statistics behind dashboarding is a huge deal for me as well. Because if you don't get the dashboards right, you don't have an accurate idea of the state of your systems, and that can be hugely misleading. And I've seen lots of people, myself included, because it's one more technology, right? So one more thing to learn. But I've seen lots of people, me included, that have a huge problem in kind of getting the statistics right and understanding where the problems are, and understanding how to approach them, how to go from certain type of metric to a graph that actually means something. So yeah, those two areas, kind of automation and statistics, metrics collection, dashboarding.
Excellent, yeah, and I can completely understand why that is of interest to you. And I think, you know, automation's something that I can relate to in a slightly different way to yourself. But I think as a consumer, as a recruiter, and then also as someone who's an engineer, automation is something that we're all adopting because it makes our life easier.
Yeah, you can deal with the 200 mails you're getting probably each day, right?
Exactly. So, you know, it gives you and the other people in the team time to focus on other tasks that can be beneficial. So, no, that's really good. Thank you. So obviously I've known you for probably, what would you say, 5 months now, maybe something.
It feels like years, Will.
I hope that's in a good way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm still sad that we didn't get to drink a beer at AWS Summit because I wasn't able to attend. But well,
I know. I'm in Germany, generally speaking, once a month. So the next time I'll
make that happen. I'll
give you a shout.
Yeah, I'll be moving to Hamburg soon. So Hamburg's always worth a visit. So
yeah, Hamburg. So Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich are the three areas that I get over to. So I'll definitely let you know. I'll have an Erdinger. So obviously, I guess the reason why I'm bringing up how long we've known each other, you know, we've had quite a few chats about what your team's looking to do at Otto, and one thing that was quite interesting to me was the fact that you have plans to move from EKS to ECS.
Yeah.
Just for people listening, in a really brief nutshell, if you like, what does that mean exactly?
First of all, sorry for everyone who tuned out now because they don't understand that one, but it's been a bit of a controversial decision, hasn't it? Basically, the world is moving towards Kubernetes and adopting the technology, and we're trying to move away from it. The reason for that is I already hinted at the fact that we today developers have to know these like gazillion technologies. So when I started out, there was basically Java. You could do client applications in Java. You had like a regular release schedule. You didn't have to know that many technologies. There were a few important libraries, and that was it. Today, we have to know, like, if you're a JavaScript developer, you have to know like 100 or 200 libraries, which are dependencies from your application, and have to kind of manage that. You have to know all of those cloud services. At my team, we're using, I don't know, at least 15 to 20 AWS services. We're running a large Kubernetes cluster, and it's just becoming too much. So the idea of having developers who know everything is, to me, completely out of the question. That's why I said, when I see a resume, a CV that has like 50 technologies and like 40 of them expert level and 10 of them like in a good familiar level, it's a bit of a hard word, isn't it? It's kind of, I don't believe that. It's just too much. Nobody can learn that many technologies and that much of an in-depth level. And that's what I noticed in the team as well. And Kubernetes, as the main driver of our microservices, is a bit of a problem because it's just a hugely complex technology on its own, right? It has this huge ecosystem, but it's hugely complex, and everyone who needs to administer the cluster, which we expect everyone to be able to, would have to know a lot about Kubernetes, and that's becoming a problem for us. So what we're looking for is a simpler technology. And what we want to have is something which, in the case of a disaster, which is easily restartable. Ideally, there wouldn't be a disaster because AWS takes care of everything for us. And ECS is a way easier technology. We don't have to know as much as developers to kind of use the technology to a proper degree. And that's the difference between ECS and EKS in my mind. EKS is hugely flexible, has this huge ecosystem, but it's also hugely complex. And for our workloads, ECS will do just as fine and is way simpler. So why not go with that?
Yeah, I mean, when you explain it like that, it makes sense. And I think to relate to what you were saying there, you know, I'm talking about job descriptions from clients. I often tend to find that, you know, I will go through a job description from a number of different companies with a candidate, and you know, I will get the feedback and say that isn't a one-person role, that's a whole IT department.
Yes.
And it's almost quite difficult to help pinpoint the important parts because they are almost saying to me, well, shouldn't that be the job description then? So
right. It's kind of interesting because if you so at Otto, at our deep sea project, each team has a certain degree of kind of technological freedom. So we are able to say that we want to implement our microservices in Java or in TypeScript or in Python or whatever we think is fit for the job and the team knows best. But that also means that every team gets to choose their own container technology. And if we choose Kubernetes, then we're in charge of running our own Kubernetes cluster. And it would actually make, in terms of Kubernetes, I guess it might even make more sense to have a centralized, huge Kubernetes cluster, which a team of real Kubernetes experts is in charge of. But well, that's not exactly the environment we're after at Otto, because we like that freedom, right? So choosing the least complex technology, which still does what we want to achieve, is for us the better approach, I guess.
Yeah, and again, I'm not going to claim that I'm a technical whiz, but
neither am I.
But I obviously know what the trends in the market are. I know what attracts people, and you know, I'd be lying if the top three things that I generally get asked about are AWS, Terraform, and Kubernetes.
Right.
So for people that may have a concern or an apprehension around, you know, a decision to do what you've said, because to me it sounds like it makes complete sense, being really simple. But what would you kind of say to people that maybe were slightly nervous or didn't want to go about it that way?
I think it's not a question of running after the trends. It's more a question of what exactly are your requirements? What kind of knowledge do you already have in the team? If the team is already kind of expert level on Kubernetes, then by all means go with Kubernetes. If the requirements require you to be hugely flexible, have this huge cluster, and you are requiring whatever the ecosystem has to offer, that's part of your requirements, then by all means go with Kubernetes. But kind of think about it in terms of what you need. And as I said, the least complex technology which fulfills that requirement, because your team already has this many technologies that they need to learn and need to be ideally very good in, of course, with experts and like sprinkled throughout the team and different technologies, but in general, they have to be very good in the technologies. And if you Kubernetes, deciding on Kubernetes is not just because it's Kubernetes, it's because it fulfills your requirements. And this kind of requirements-based approach is what I would recommend, I guess.
Yeah, no, that again makes complete sense, and thank you for giving me that understanding. I know how busy you are, and I believe you've had a go live this week, and
that is true. A successful one, I might add.
A successful go live. So I don't want to, you know, obviously keep you too long, and I obviously really appreciate you speaking to me and giving me that insight. And I think it's, you know, it's really interesting for people to understand from a manager or a lead perspective like yourself, the take on the market. One thing I am looking to introduce, and obviously do with the next guest, is ask them, you know, similar questions around their experiences, their background. But, you know, who am I to dictate everything that's spoken about? So I would, if you don't mind, would like you to provide me with a question, a thought-provoking one, hopefully, that I can ask my next guest, who, you know, will be someone in a similar line of work to yourself.
Yeah, sure. I have 5 dumb questions, but if it's thought-provoking questions that you're after, then that's just as well. So I guess one of the things that struck me when I was going through the hiring process and application process after university was really the question of how much emphasis do you put on tick marks and checkboxes, like technology checkboxes. So the candidate knows this technology, the candidate knows that technology. That makes that person a better candidate than the other candidate. But how much of an emphasis do you place on ticking the checkboxes as opposed to being able to learn new technologies? That would be, and how do you even assess either, right?
Yeah.
People can check lots of tick lots of checkboxes, but that doesn't mean that they really know the technologies. That doesn't mean that they know their stuff. It just means that they said they know their stuff. And the whole idea of how quickly can someone pick something up is hard to gauge, right, to measure. So yeah, how do you balance the two, and how do you measure them? That would be, I guess, a good question out from my own experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's a really good way of looking at things, because again, you know, I've recruited into my own team, and you know, asking people closed questions like, have you done this, and how long for, how long have you done this, you know, they can answer yes, but okay, how have you done it, or can you pick up these technologies or this experience, etc. So yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to asking my next lucky guest.
Nice.
You know, and be sure to tune in next time and obviously see what they say. But thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me again. I know how busy you are.
Cheers. No worries.
What are the plans for Friday? A beer maybe? I don't know.
Oh, a beer will be in it, yeah, tomorrow. Friday will be spent just relaxing, and then it'll be beer tomorrow and more relaxing. Yeah, that'll be great after this week.
Good stuff. I don't blame you. Well, thanks again, Chris. Have a great weekend.
You
and
too.
Yeah, I'll speak to you soon, no doubt.
Cool. Cheers, man.